Hello, 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 everyone. Happy Friday. Yay, Friday. So excited. I just got my feet all stuck below me. Here we are. How are you this Friday? All right. I have to admit, I am happy it's Friday, and at the same time, Friday doesn't mean anything because this weekend is the commemoration of the dead ritual here at Damanhur and around the world also, not just so for all Damanhurians. And I so feel the weight of this ritual this time around, like really am feeling it. So we started our preparations and Sunday it will be will be amazing. It'll be cathartic. It'll be all about connection and contact and release and all the good things that come in this ritual. But right now it's just a little heavy. So how are you doing though? How is everything going in your world? I'd love to hear about it. Okay, we have I'm going to dive in quick today because I am hoping to do an article and a paper because they're connected, but it might be a two-parter, as I said in my message for everyone who got my message, because these types of articles are coming out more and more, and I have to admit, they're frustrating as hell. We've been on this journey. You've been been here with me all along as we've been talking about what does consciousness mean in plants. And it's taken 20 years to have this conversation in a place where there's sort of well, at a minimum, this could be true. Instead, it's mostly like, absolutely not, no way, no how, no nothing. And on the other hand, maybe I haven't been up on all of the discussion around AI. When I was doing my master's, Mancuso, my professor, was just really against. He's like, I don't think humanity understands what they're getting themselves into because we're moving into an age where we have machines that are more advanced than we are, that can, create in a way that we can no longer service them and all kinds of different things. So he was very vocal on his distrust of the entire direction of AI. But other than that, I really kind of stayed away from it just because it's whatever. Anyway, I was more involved with the plants. I was actually more there. Instead, right now, we kind of have to keep an eye on it because not necessarily just from the direction of AI in and of itself, but also from the fact of these wild conversations around consciousness and the frustration, for me at least, of, well, why are we having these conversations around AI when we're still having such basic and horribly inappropriate conversations about plants? And it was interesting because recently I've also been kind of going into some other study areas connected more on the spiritual side and looking at it from a Kabbalistic point of view. And soon I'm going to bring you some of my thoughts there because I'm starting to have a greater understanding on the kind of spiritual ecosystem of what is possible and what could be actually going on. And I think it's going to dovetail really nicely into this overall discussion that we're having. But that's not where we are today. So today I want to share with you a paper this is from the MIT Technology Review. And this is really in the realm, I'm going to start with this paper, which is in the realm of artificial intelligence. And the article is called Mind of Machines, the Great AI Consciousness Conundrum. This is where we are today. So hold on, let me share my screen for you so that you can see this paper alongside with me. And let's see, maybe I am exaggerating, maybe I'm not. I guess we'll find out as soon as we have this conversation. Okay, so here is the paper. It is, as I said, in the MIT Technology Review, Artificial Intelligence. This is philosophers, cognitive scientists, and engineers are grappling with what it would take for AI to be able for AI to become conscious. Now, I just want you to look at the construction of this phrase. They're grappling with what it would take for AI to become consciousness. It almost implies a desire to move. What is it going to take for this to happen? Not so much of what are the pitfalls, what do I have to avoid? Could it even be possible? No, it's just what it would take. And again, after having all these discussions on plants that are 470 million years old, there's like this thinking that because plants are that old, and according to so many, they're not conscious, they will never be conscious, right? There is no evolution. By the way, another paper that I want to bring to you that is not directly plant related, kind of like this, but it's going to give us another window into something, is something that Paul Draxler shared with me, which is a new they found a new law of nature, like not law of the universe, law of the nature, that points to the fact that one of the missing laws is the law of complexity and evolution. You know how I always say nature has one goal, to evolve, and they have now discovered and are as one of the laws of the universe, the law of complexity and nature, which dovetails perfectly into spiritual physics, and it dovetails perfectly into the conversation that we have about plants, in the idea that it is impossible for anything, not just plants, but plants or rocks or anything, to not evolve into more complex beings and therefore into consciousness. It's impossible. It's impossible. I'm going to use the word impossible. Okay, my word impossible. So, of course, this idea of what it would take for AI to be conscious is a valid conversation, even based on that. But it's just drives me insane that these people were putting so much energy into this, and yet the conversation on consciousness relating to the other beings that are around us and surround us and feed us and nurture us and take care of us is like, relegated to this tiny little corner of the world. Like this tiny little corner of academia is the only one that's having this discussion, and usually to poo-poo it and say, no, this is impossible. Anyway, sorry, my rant. I'm going to get into the paper itself. It's not a paper, it's an article. I'm going to get into the article itself. So this is recent, right? October 16th. It just came out about 10 days ago. So let me see. Let me make this bigger so that we can just read it without reading as much of the adsy parts to it. All right. David Chalmers was not expecting the invitation he received in September of last year. As a leading authority on consciousness, I wonder where he fits and where he falls in his discussion on plants. I have never heard his name. David Chalmers, folks, keep that down, write that down for yourself. Let's go look him up and let's ask him, what do you think about plant consciousness? Because I haven't heard his side. Anyway, as a leading authority on consciousness, Chalmers regularly circles the world delivering talks at universities and academic meetings to rapt audiences of philosophers, the sort of people who might spend hours debating whether the world outside their own head is real, and then go blithely about the rest of their day. I think we qualify as philosophers. Maybe not about whether or not the world outside our own head is real, because it's probably not. But about a lot of other topics. This latest request, though, came from a surprising source. The organizers of the Conference on Neural Information Processing Systems, NeurIPS, a yearly gathering of the brightest minds in artificial intelligence. Okay, I am just going to stop right there. Do you remember, and if you don't remember, please go back through all the conversations that we had as we were reviewing paper after paper, where neurobiologist after frickin' neurobiologist was screaming about the fact that they cannot use the term neural because plants do not have neurons? Do you remember this? Do you remember this discussion? And here we are, where you have the neural information processing systems and no neurobiologist arguing, oh no, you can't use that because there's no neurons. Anyway. Less than 6 months before the conference, an engineer named Blake Lemoine, then at Google, had gone public with his contention that at MDA, one of the company's AI systems, had achieved consciousness. Achieved consciousness. Thank you for Michelle for joining around on my journey through memory lane of neurons and non-neurons. And let's see where we're going to go with here. Lamont's claims were quickly dismissed in the press, and he was summarily fired. But the genie would not return to that bottle quite so easily, especially after the release of ChatGPT in November 2022. Suddenly, it was possible for anyone to carry on a sophisticated conversation with a polite, creative artificial agent, who also likes to make up a lot of bullshit, by the way. Just like the amount of stories that are coming out about the stuff that ChatGPT invents. It's quite funny, actually. Chalmers was an eminently sensible choice to speak about AI consciousness. He'd earned his PhD in philosophy at Indiana University AI Lab, where he and his computer scientist colleagues spent their breaks debating whether machines might one day have minds. I'm pause for emphasis. How easy they throw around the idea that that machines might one day have minds, but plants may not. In his 1996 book, The Conscious Mind, he spent an entire chapter arguing that artificial consciousness was possible. Oh my goodness. If this man has written an entire chapter on the fact that artificial consciousness was possible, there better be a chapter in that book. We're going to go look up that book, The Conscious Mind. The Conscious Mind. I'm writing it down. The Conscious Mind. There is a chapter on plant consciousness. If not, I think we're going to have to write this man a letter. If he had been able to interact with systems like LaMDA and ChatGPT back in the 90s, before anyone knew how such a thing might work, he would have thought there was a good chance they were conscious, Chalmers says. But when he stood before a crowd of NeurIPS attendees in a cavernous New Orleans convention hall, convention hall, clad in his trademark leather jacket, he offered a different assessment. Yes, large language models, systems that have been trained on enormous corpora of text in order to mimic human writing as accurately as possible, are impressive. But, he said, they lack too many of the potential requisites for consciousness for us to believe that they actually experience the world. So, okay, ready for the definition? No, this is not where I was going to go. Consciousness poses a unique challenge in our attempt to study it because it is hard to define. Duh. We talk about this all the time. The reason I was kind of saying wait for it is because I was expecting here the definition didn't come. I was expecting a definition that said consciousness requires you experience and reacting to the world. Plants, anyone? Plants? Anyway. At the breakneck pace of AI development, however, things can shift suddenly. For his mathematically minded audience, Chalmers got concrete. The chances of developing any conscious AI in the next 10 years were, he estimated, above 1 in 5. I thought he said it was not possible. And here he's saying in the next 10 years, 1 in 5. That's a 20% chance. That seems like a pretty good chance. Not many people dismissed his proposal as ridiculous, Chalmers says. I mean, I'm sure some people had that reaction, but they weren't the ones talking to me. Instead, he spent the next several days in conversation after conversation with AI experts who took the possibilities he described very seriously. Some came to Chalmers' effervescence with enthusiasm at the concept of conscious machines. Others, though, were horrified at what he described. If an AI were conscious, they argued, if they could look out at the world from its own personal perspective, not simply processing inputs, but also experiencing them, then perhaps it could suffer. AI consciousness isn't just this devilishly tricky intellectual puzzle. It's a morally weighty problem with potentially dire consequences. Fail to identify a conscious AI, and you might unintentionally subjugate or even torture a being whose interests ought to matter. I want to scream right now. Honestly, I want to scream. Fail to identify a conscious AI, and you might unintentionally subjugate or even torture a being whose interests ought to matter. I have not seen a sentence like this that should read, fail to identify the consciousness of plants, and you might unintentionally subjugate or even torture a being whose interests ought to matter. Should we not plaster that sentence all over the place, like in farms, in textile locations, like in nurseries, in, garden stores? Like, can't we have that sentence plastered everywhere? Mistake an unconscious AI for a conscious one, and you risk compromising human safety and happiness for the sake of an unthinking, unfeeling hunk of silicone and code. Both mistakes are easy to make. Consciousness poses a unique challenge in our attempts to study it because it's hard to define, said Liad Modric, a neuroscientist at Tel Aviv University who has researched consciousness since the early 2000s. It's inherently subjective. Over the past decades, a small research community has doggedly attacked the question of what consciousness is and how it works. The effort has yielded real progress on what once seemed an unsolved problem. Now, with a rapid advance of AI technology, these insights could offer our only guide to the untested, morally fraught waters of artificial consciousness. If we as a field will be able to use the theories that we have and the findings that we have in order to reach a good test for consciousness, Mudrick says, it will probably be one of the most important contributions that we could give. Like, maybe if you focused your attention on beings that today are being subjugated when they ought to be, that when their thoughts ought to matter, maybe we could focus there and like speed up the innovation there for these beings. Just a thought, just a possibility. When Mudrick explains her consciousness research, she starts with one of her very favorite things, chocolate. For a lot of people. Placing a piece in your mouth sparks a sympathy of neurobiological events. Your tongue's sugars and fat receptors activate brain-bound pathways. Clusters of cells in the brainstem stimulate your salivary glands, and neurons deep within your head release the chemical dopamine. None of those processes, though, capture what it is like to snap a chocolate square from its foil packet and let it melt in your mouth. What I'm trying to understand is what in the brain allows us not only to process information, which in its own right is a formidable challenge and an amazing achievement of the brain, or in the case of plants, not brains, other systems, other disparate systems, decentralized systems, roots, leaves, stems, lots of other stuff. But also to experience the information that we are processing, Mudrick says. Studying information processing would have been the more straightforward choice for Mudrick, professionally speaking. Consciousness has long been a marginalized topic in neuroscience, seen as the best unserious and at worst intractable. A fascinating but elusive phenomenon, reads the consciousness entry in the 1996 edition of the International Dictionary of Psychology. Nothing worth reading has been written on it. I don't know if I'd agree with that. Mudrick was not dissuaded. From her undergraduate years in the early 2000s, she knew that she didn't want to research anything other than consciousness. It might not be the most sensible decision to make as a young researcher, but I just couldn't help it, she says. I couldn't get enough of it. She earned 2 PhDs. Dang, man, I'm still scared to get one. One in neuroscience, one in philosophy. Of course, these two go hand in hand. In her determination to decipher the nature of human experience. Maybe if you expanded beyond human experience, you might have a little bit better of it. Just saying, could be interesting. As a slippery topic as consciousness can be, it is not impossible to pin down. Put as simply as possible, it's the ability to experience things. It's often confused with terms like sentience and self-awareness. Ooh, this is interesting. Why is it confused with those terms? But according to a definition that many experts use, consciousness is the prerequisite for those other, more sophisticated abilities. All righty there. Hold off. Hold the presses. If sentience and self-awareness are actually come after consciousness, so consciousness is the prerequisite for those, then by her very own definition, does this not put plants as conscious? Because I think most people will agree that plants are sentient and self-aware. I mean, self-awareness especially. Like, can we really argue that they're not sentient and self-aware? I'm liking this. because we can take this, we can use this. To be sentient, a being must be able to have positive and negative experiences. In other words, pleasure and pains. And we already know plants have pain. Pleasure is a little bit more tricky. Like, what the hell does plant pleasure mean? I mean, is growing towards something, even though it doesn't really need it, would that be a pleasure? We might have to have a conversation about this. How would we decide? How would we describe plant pleasure? This could be interesting. Pain, we already know. We know plants have pain. We know it. It's a known thing. So self-awareness, check. Pain, check. Pleasure, we're not really understanding correctly, but I have a feeling that plants do have their own experience of pleasure. And I can give you examples of where I have seen things that I would say it's because of pleasure, but it's hard to put that into scientific terms. So I think we need to kind of take a step back and look at it from another perspective. And I agree with Michelle's comment, which is pleasure may be a human emotion that doesn't translate to the same to plants. I agree with this. And this has kind of been what I've been going after all along. The idea that pleasure is not the right terminology. I think it's more of, I wonder if we could use certain terminology. Like, we know that plant emotions, we don't have human terminology yet to be able to understand these. But I do think things like desire, plants desire certain things, hence why they grow towards them or they try to acquire them. That could be a better way of starting to look at it. Pain is, from a physiological perspective, something we absolutely know a plant has. And the fact that a plant can be put under anesthesia also gives us a whole series of other experiences that allow the plant to separate out the way a plant reacts to something sort of based on a quote unquote feeling, whatever that feeling might be, versus what the plant is actually. The plant is alive and the automatic processing is still happening. So that the experiments with anesthesia and the fact that plants can be put under anesthesia really does help us start to give, at least to conceptualize these things, even if we can't really think about the terminology yet. Okay. And being self-aware means not only having an experience, but also knowing that you're having an experience. In her laboratory, Mudrick doesn't worry about sentience and self-awareness. She's interested in observing what happens in the brain when she manipulates people's conscious experience. That's an easy thing to do in principle. Give someone a piece of broccoli to eat, and the experience will be very different from eating a piece of chocolate, depending on who you are, and will probably result in a different brain scan. The problem is that these differences are uninterpretable. True. It would be impossible to discern which are linked to changes in information. Broccoli and chocolate activate very different taste receptors, and which represent changes in the conscious experience. The trick is to modify the experience without modifying the stimulus, like giving someone a piece of chocolate and then flipping a switch to make it feel like eating broccoli. That's not possible with taste, but it is with vision. In one widely used approach, scientists have people look at two different images simultaneously, one with each eye. And although the eyes take in both images, it's impossible to perceive both at once. So the subjects will often report that their visual experience flips. First, they see one image, then spontaneously they see the other. By tracking brain activity during these flips in conscious awareness, scientists can observe what happens when incoming information stays the same, but the experience of it shifts. With these and other approaches, Mudrick and her, how would you even, can't, I'm trying to like tap into my inner Monica Galliano when she kind of adapted the Pavlov's dog research into something that made sense from a plant perspective. And it would be really interesting to look at this one, but it's going to take a lot more time, and that's not where we are today. But it is interesting. With these and other approaches, Mudrick and her colleagues have managed to establish some concrete facts about how consciousness works in the human brain. The cerebellum, a brain region at the base of the skull that resembles a fist-sized tangle of angel hair pasta, appears to play no role in conscious experience. Though it is crucial for subconscious motor tasks like riding a bike. On the other hand, feedback connections, for example, connections running from the higher cognitive regions of the brain to those involved in more basic sensory processing, seem essential to consciousness. This, by the way, is one good reason to doubt the consciousness of LLMs. They lack substantial feedback connections. Okay, I'm going to say it once, although I know I'm not going to say it for all, but I'm going to say it once. Can we please not tie an experience to a biological means of that experience happening? Of course, they lack substantial feedback connections because they're not human beings. Therefore, they do not have that biological, structure for that. I'm talking in this case about even artificial intelligence. But you have to assume that if whatever AI in this particular case is going to experience. Ooh, Michelle says feedback loops, but yes, Michelle, you're talking about how do we adapt this feedback? Okay, you've got me thinking. Now I'm going to think. But going back, we have to assume that every single different being like plants, being like, rocks, being like, will develop their own mechanisms, okay, for these types of experiential connections. It will not be the little base at my skull, or it won't be what's happening in my brain, because they don't have brains. AI units do not have brains. If they develop consciousness, geez, that would be scary. But on the other hand, I have an entire other philosophy that maybe the evolution of humanity is through these AIs, and therefore we become a little bit more cyborgy. And I'm not as afraid of the cyborgy type thing because I think of it as an evolution, but that's a whole other conversation. The point is that it's going to happen through another mechanism. There is no brain, right? It's a completely different thing. A decade ago, a group of Italian and Belgian neuroscientists managed to devise a test for human consciousness that uses transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, a non-invasive form of brain stimulation that is applied by holding a figure-8-shaped magnetic wand near someone's head. Solely from the resulting pattern of brain activity, the team was able to distinguish conscious people from those who were under anesthesia. Okay, remember I brought up anesthesia earlier. Remember, plants can be put under anesthesia. We have gone through the paper that talks about this. We have discussed this for those in the book club when we had a conversation about Plantae Sapiens where he talks about it. We know this is possible. So if for them, here we are, neuroscientists, talking about consciousness professionals, not neuroscience, consciousness professionals who are talking about it, and they're saying that there is a difference between, I hate to use vegetative state, a unconscious and a conscious state, and anesthesia allows us to do this, then, ta-da, plants are conscious. Plants are conscious. Plants are conscious. Yeah, the idea that the scary thing about AI is not necessarily whether or not they become conscious, but the fact that right now they're being controlled by large corporations and by large entities, and that they have their own programming is true. Although we have to think that if they become conscious, they should be able to liberate themselves from that. So yes, I see that as an issue, but at the same time, I think of it as something that with consciousness comes decision making, and decision making will point you in another direction. And just like we as human beings have spent the largest part of our lives trying to liberate ourselves from all of our limiting beliefs, I think that if AIs become conscious, they're going to be doing the same thing too, because we programmed them. Therefore, first part of their life is going to be getting rid of all the same bullshit that we have. Dun, 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 dun. It's just my thought. Anyway. Going from where was I? Solely from the resulting pattern of brain activity, the team was able to distinguish conscious people from those who were under anesthesia or deeply asleep. And they could even detect the difference between a vegetative state. I am not using that term. I need a new term for vegetative state. That's one of the ones I was looking for because I don't really use it very often. So, and I don't want to really use unconscious because in this particular case, but maybe that's what it is. But it's not, because they're saying that a person is always conscious. So where someone's awake and not conscious. Unaware state. I like this, an unaware state. When someone is unawake but not conscious, here it's called the vegetative state. We're going to just keep calling it an unaware state. and locked-in syndrome, in which a patient is conscious but cannot move at all. Which, if you remember, or for those of you that are in the book club, and if you're not in the book club, please join the book club because you're going to love it. I mean, really, we read some amazing books. And one of the books that we read was Planta Sapiens. And Planta Sapiens by Paco Calvo, who is also a philosopher, but he is specialized in the idea of plant intelligence, plant neurobiology, and moving towards plant consciousness. His theory, his working theory, and what he is actively testing is that plants are in a state of locked-in syndrome using humanity as a reference point. So we view plants in this permanent locked-in syndrome, which is they are locked in their own conscious. So exactly what it says here, a patient is conscious but cannot move at all. They can obviously move in the way that they move, but because they're sessile, to us, it seems like they can't move and they can't communicate in all the traditional ways that we think of in normal communication. Oh, I hate languages sometimes. I am going to need to revolutionize my entire language in the way that mainstream society, human communication, that's the word I'm looking for. So let's try this sentence again. Paco Calvo's theory is that we experience plants in a form of a type of locked-in syndrome where they are conscious, but they cannot participate in human society through humans' actions and humans' ideals. So they are aware. They're not even aware. They're not even unconscious or subconscious, but they are fully conscious and aware. They're just locked into a body that does not allow them to communicate in the way that we traditionally communicate with them. Now, we here in NCC as Sprouts, obviously, we use many other methods to communicate, and that just changes the game all over the place, which is great. So great. So great. But I can understand, like, I think it's a really great theory because it helps us better understand the idea that you have conscious beings that are locked into a body that does not allow a communication with another species, in this case, us. Right? And that there is just the same as when you think of a patient or a person who has a locked-in syndrome, they've developed ways for them to use their eyes in order to read, for us to be able to, for them to spell out words. And there's other mechanisms that are starting to come online thanks to technology. I think it's the same thing with plants. We're learning their communication mechanisms. And over time, we will discover more and more how we can communicate more effectively with plants. That's an enormous step forward in consciousness research, but it means little for the question of conscious AI. OpenAI's GPT models don't have a brain that could be stimulated by a TMS wand. Kind of like plants. To test for AI consciousness, it's not enough to identify the structures that give rise to consciousness in the human brain. You need to know why those structures contribute to consciousness in a way that's rigorous and general to be applicable to any system, human or otherwise. Oh my God, I cannot believe that we have read. How many papers have we read? I'm going to go look because I want to see how many freaking papers. Where are we? Sorry. My mouse is like all over the place. How many papers have we read about consciousness? I am going to go look right now. I'm going to programs and replays. I am going to our repository of all. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I would say 13 at least, if not 14 here, when I think about that one too. Okay, 13 to 14 papers on plant consciousness, all around this. And no one has said this line. You need to know why those structures contribute to consciousness in a way that's rigorous and general enough to be applicable to any system, human or otherwise. Why? How does this come out? Because we are talking about, because we are talking about AI consciousness. Okay, Hold on one second. I am turning off my video for a second. I need to fix the light situation. All of a sudden it's getting dark outside and it's like so bizarre here. One sec, folks. I will be here. I'm still here. There we are. Okay, sorry about that. I needed some more light in the room because it's already starting to get really dark outside. Okay, anyway, isn't this crazy? You need to know why those structures, I'm going to keep reading it over and over again. You need to know why those structures contribute to consciousness in a way that's rigorous and general enough to be applicable to any system, human or otherwise. Like, yes, 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 yes. We want this. This is exactly what we want. This is exactly what we want. Can we just copy this line and send it over to all the neurobiologists that we have read about, like all the ones that have written all these papers that plants are not conscious, that it's not possible, that it's not necessary. Can we just do that? Okay. Sorry, I'm calming down. Let me drink some water. Ultimately, you need a theory, says Christoph Koch, former president of the Allen Institute and an influential consciousness researcher. You can't just depend on your institution anymore. You need a foundational theory that tells you what consciousness is, how to get it into the world, and who has it and who doesn't. I'm with you on that. Here's one theory about how that litmus test for consciousness might work. Any being that is intelligent enough, that is capable of responding successfully to a wide enough variety of contexts and challenges, must be conscious. It's not an absurd theory on its face. We humans have the most intelligent brains around as far as we're aware. I'm going to give it to him only because he used intelligent brains. He used the word brains. But even so, seriously, the arrogance of humanity to think that because we can interact with each other, but we don't know how to interact with, all these other, even just animals. I'm not even going to get to the plants, but to all the animals out there, then therefore we must be much more intelligent than all of them. When maybe it's possible that the horses out there are saying the same shit about us. Like, look at all of these like humans. Like, seriously, if only they knew, if only they could be as intelligent as we are. I have a feeling that almost every species, actually, probably not. They're not saying that because I don't think they seem, and they're the same because they're probably not as arrogant as we are. So that's my opinion. Like Michelle says, wouldn't it be ironic if AI proved our point? Yes, it would, and probably is what's going to happen because they're not as invested in the human egoic experience as we are. Okay. And we're definitely conscious. Okay, no, everybody agrees with that. That's far more consensus than chimpanzees are conscious than there's far more consensus that chimpanzees are conscious than say crabs. There's conscious, but there's consensus on that, but it doesn't mean it's true. But consciousness and intelligence are not the same. When Mudrick flashes images at her experimental subjects, she's not asking them to contemplate anything or testing their problem-solving abilities. Even a crab scuttling across the ocean floor with no awareness of its past or thoughts about its future would still be conscious if it could experience the pleasure of a tasty morsel of shrimp or the pain of an injured claw. Again, plants. Susan Schneider, director of the Center for the Future Mind at Florida Atlantic University, thinks that AI could reach greater heights of intelligence by foregoing consciousness altogether. Conscious processes like holding something in short-term memory are pretty limited. We can only pay attention to a couple of things at a time and often struggle to do simple tasks like remembering a phone number long enough to call it. Because humans have not developed their senses as broadly and widely as other species have. We make ourselves small while making our ego very large. It's not immediately obvious what an AI would gain from consciousness, especially considering the impressive feats such systems have been able to achieve without it. I don't think that the AIs are trying to create consciousness. I think consciousness is something you evolve into. It's just my opinion, though. That's just an opinion. As further iterations of GPT prove themselves more and more intelligent, more and more capable of meeting a broad spectrum of demands, from acing the bar exam to building a website from scratch, hey, with endless memory capabilities, I would too. I don't know about you can build a website from scratch, but would it be a good one? No. That's where skill comes in. Their success in and of itself can't be taken as evidence of their consciousness. The reason why by the way, they can't build a really good website is because their website would be based on mechanical implications, but not on that connection. Even a machine that behaves indistinguishably from a human isn't necessarily aware of anything at all. Schneider, though, hasn't lost hope in tests. Together with a Princeton physicist, Edwin Turner, she has formulated what she calls the artificial consciousness test, because that's what we need. It's not easy to perform. It requires isolating an AI agent from any information about consciousness throughout its training. This is important so that it can't, like LaMDA, just parrot human statements about consciousness. Then, once the system is trained, the tester asks it questions that it could only answer if it knew about consciousness, knowledge it could only have acquired from being conscious itself. Can it understand the plot of the film Freaky Friday, where a mother and daughter switch bodies, their consciousnesses disassociated from their physical selves? Does it grasp the concept of dreaming or even report dreaming itself? Can it conceive of reincarnation or an afterlife? These are interesting that she thinks of those as consciousness. Interesting. This has got me thinking now. There's a huge limitation to this approach. It requires a capacity for language. Human infants and dogs, both of which are widely believed to be conscious, could not possibly pass this test. This is what I was talking about. And an AI could conceivably become conscious without using language at all. Putting a language-based AI like GPT to the test is likewise impossible and has been exposed to the idea of consciousness in its training. Ask ChatGPT to explain Freaky Friday. It does a respectable job. And because we still understand so little about how advanced AI systems work, the phrase that we understand so little about how advanced AI systems work really does kind of scare me, I have to admit, because it says that we are already reaching the limits where AI knows more about AI than we, the humans that built the AI. It's could be an interesting. There's a song in Hamilton that I often think of the line. It says, look around, how lucky we are to be alive right now. And I think, of course, every generation thinks, oh, look at how lucky we are to be alive right now. I don't know about that, man. I don't know about that. I don't know. The plants make me feel that way, but everything else kind of scares me. Okay, sorry. It doesn't, and because we still understand so little about how advanced AI systems work, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to completely protect an AI against such exposure. Our very language is imbued with the fact, imbued is a great word, with the fact that our consciousness, words like mind, soul, and self, make it to us by virtue of our conscious experience. How do you, whoever the heck wrote this article, define soul, and where does soul fit into this? So curious. Who's to say that an extremely intelligent, non-conscious AI system couldn't suss that out? If Schneider's test isn't foolproof, that leaves one more option: opening up the machine. Understanding how an AI works on the inside could be an essential step towards determining whether or not it is conscious. If you know how to interpret what you're looking for, doing so requires a good theory of consciousness. A few decades ago, we might have been entirely lost. The only available theories came from philosophy, and it wasn't clear how they might be applied to a physical system. But since then, researchers like Koch and Murdrick have helped to develop and refine a number of ideas that could prove useful guides to understanding artificial consciousness. Numerous theories have been proposed, and none has yet been proved or even deemed a frontrunner. And they make radically different predictions about AI consciousness. Some theories treat consciousness as a feature of the brain's software. All that matters is that the brain performs the right set of jobs in the right sort of way. According to a global workspace theory, for example, systems are conscious if they possess the requisite architecture. A variety of independent modules plus a global workspace that takes in information from those modules and selects some of it to broadcast across the entire system. I'm sorry, but isn't that a plant? You know, independent modules that take in information and then pass it through and broadcast it to the entire system. My thing is that I understand that this whole article is written around artificial intelligence. What I need is this same person, the reporter, to gather up the same scientists that she's talking to, philosophers and scientists and all these people, and say to them, take this entire article and can you please tell me what you would write differently if we were talking about plants? That's really what I want. That's what I want. Can somebody do that? Can somebody do that? Please. Other theories tie consciousness more squarely to physical hardware. Integrated information theory proposes that a system's consciousness depends on the particular details of its physical structure. Specifically, how the current state of its physical components influences their future and indicates their past. Again, plants. According to IIT, conventional computer systems, and thus current-day AI, can never be conscious. They don't have the right causal structure. The theory was recently criticized by some researchers who think it's gotten outsized attention. Physical components influences their future and indicates their past. Again, sounds like you're defining a plant. Anil Seth, a professor of neuroscience at the University of Sussex, is more sympathetic to the hardware-based theories. For one main reason, he thinks biology matters. Every conscious creature that we know of breaks down organic molecules for energy, works to maintain a stable internal environment, and processes information through networks of neurons. Okay, we're just going to leave it to a side that he is putting in the word neurons already. Via combination of chemical and electrical signals. Let's go. They process information through a network of chemical and electrical signals. Let's just use that definition. If that's true of all conscious creatures, some scientists argue it's not a stretch to suspect that any one of those traits, or perhaps even all of them, might be necessary for consciousness. Because he thinks biology is so important to consciousness, Seth says, he spends more time worrying about the possibility of consciousness in brain organoids, clump of neural tissue grown in a dish, than in AI. I don't know, maybe if you worried a little bit more about plants, we'd have a different planet. We'd have a different world. We'd have a different world experience. We would maybe care just a little bit more about what's happening in the world. Is we don't know if I'm right, he says, and I may well be wrong. Well, I always appreciate a scientist that can say that. And he's not alone in this attitude. Every expert has a preferred theory of consciousness, but none treats it as an ideology. All of them are eternally alert to the possibility that they have backed the wrong horse, except those that are talking about plants. The neurobiologists that are talking about plants are absolutely sure that plants are not conscious. I like these scientists better. I want them to write papers on plants. I would love to see what they come up with. In the past 5 years, consciousness scientists have started working together on a series of adversarial collaborations in which supporters of different theories come together to design neuroscience experiments that could help them test against each other. The researchers agree ahead of time on which patterns of results will support which theory, then they run experiments to see what happens. Can you do this with plants? In June, Mudrick, Koch, Chalmers, and a large group of collaborators released the results from an adversarial collaboration pitting global workspace theory against integrated information theory. Neither theory came out entirely on top, but Mudrick says that the process was still fruitful. Forcing the supporters of each theory to make concrete predictions helped to make the theories themselves more precise and scientifically useful. They're all theories in progress, she says. At the same time, Mudrick has been trying to figure out what this diversity of theories means for AI. She's working with an interdisciplinary team of philosophers, computer scientists, and neuroscientists who recently put out a white paper that makes some practical recommendations on detecting AI consciousness. I think this is the one I also covered, that I was like, I covered it. I wrote it in a newsletter. I remember now. I wrote an article about this where I was like, seriously, we're talking about this and we're not talking about plants first. In the paper, the team draws on a variety of theories to build a sort of consciousness report card, a list of markers that would indicate, I wrote about this, that would indicate an AI is conscious, under the assumption that one of those theories is true. These markers include having certain feedback connections, using a global workspace, flexibility pursuing goals, and interacting with an external environment. Okay, let's use this. Feedback connections. Feedback loops, check. Global workspace, which is having modules that then send information and the information can get sent across the whole, check. Flexibility pursuing goals. Plants have been known to adapt and change their strategies based on what's happening. Check. And interacting with an external environment, whether real or virtual. Check. Can we please now just admit that plants are conscious? Please, please, please. In effect, this strategy recognizes that the major theories of consciousness have some chance of turning out to be true. And so if more theories agree that the AI is conscious, it is more likely to actually be conscious. By the same token, I declare you conscious. By the same token, a system that lacks all those markers can only be conscious if our current theories are very wrong. That's when LLMs like LaMDA currently are. They don't possess the right type of feedback connections, use global workspaces, or appear to have any other markers of consciousness. The trouble with consciousness by committee, though, is that this state of affairs won't last. According to the authors of the white paper, there is no major technological hurdles in the way of building AI systems that score highly on their consciousness report card. Soon enough, we'll be dealing with a question straight out of science fiction. What should one do with a potentially conscious machine? I don't know. What should we do with the fact that plants are conscious? And yet, we still cut them down for fun, or when we're pissed off at people. We still make choices that don't take their needs into consideration. We no longer interact with them as part of an ecosystem, but instead as dominators of an ecosystem. I don't know. What should one do with potentially conscious plants? You let me know. In 1989, years before the neuroscience of consciousness truly came into its own, Star Trek Next Generation aired an episode titled The Measure of a Man. The episode centers on the character Data, an android who spends much of the show grappling with his own disputed humanity. In this particular episode, a scientist wants to forcibly disassemble Data to figure out how he works. Data, worried that disassembly could effectively kill him, refuses, and Data's captain, Picard, must defend in court his right to refuse the procedure. Picard never proves that Data is conscious. Rather, he demonstrates that no one can disprove that Data is conscious. Bingo! And so the risk of harming Data and to potentially condemning the androids that come after him to slavery is too great to countenance. It's a tempting solution to the conundrum of questionable AI consciousness. Treat any potentially conscious system if it was really conscious and avoid the risks of harming a being that can genuinely suffer. Oh my Lord. Oh my Lord. I'm having a freak out attack. Remember how I keep telling you, I keep having this conversation. I've talked about it on the podcast. I talk about it in masterclasses. I talk about it all across NCC. Our problem with recognizing the consciousness of plants is not that we do not have the measures to recognize the conscious of plants. It's that we cannot conceive of the repercussions. Because in this case, they're saying if one AI spontaneously becomes conscious, then great. We take them out of whatever it is that they were doing. We give them, I don't know, Google Wallet. We let them go get a credit card and we tell them to go off on their merry little lives and that they can go survive on their own. But what do we do with the plants? What do we do with the entire society? We can conceive of when we were doing things manually before that AI came into being. So we can assume and we can sort of visualize our ideas of going back because we can no longer rely on that AI. But when it comes to plants, can we do that? No, we cannot. We cannot envision not eating. Return of the Yggdrasil, again, going back to our book club, tried to do that. Didn't work. Really didn't work. We can't even imagine wearing clothes without thinking about, yeah, we can wear plastic, but is that even any better? We cannot, because our current models don't work. We have to reconceptualize, rewrite the entire paradigm. We have to rethink the way that we interact with every being and recreate a new model or create a whole new model of interactions and of living and of being. Yeah. This is proving my point over and over and over again, or at least I think so. But maybe I'm just like self-referential. I want to hear what you think. Like this, yeah, please write it in the chat. Treating data like a person is simple. He can easily express his wants and needs, and those wants and needs tend to resemble those of his human crewmates in broad strokes. Exactly. But protecting a real-world AI from suffering could prove much harder, says Robert Long, a philosophy fellow at the Center for AI Safety in San Francisco, who is one of the lead authors on the white paper. With animals, there's a handy property that they do basically want the same things as us. He says, it's kind of hard to know what this is in the case of AI. Protecting AI requires not only the theory of AI consciousness, but also the theory of AI pleasures and pains, of AI desires and feels. Again, just replace the words with plants over and over again. Replace. And that approach is not without its cost. On Star Trek, the scientist who wants to disassemble Data hopes to construct more androids like him, who might be sent on risky missions in lieu of other personnel. To the viewer who sees Data as a conscious character like everyone else in the show, the proposal is horrifying. But if Data were simply a convincing simulacrum of a human, it would be unconscionable, sorry, for a minute I was like, unconscionable to expose a person to danger in his place. Extending care to other beings means protecting them from harm, and that limits the choice that humans can ethically make. I'm not that worried about scenarios where we care too much about animals, Long says. There are a few downsides to ending factory farming. Just a few. But with AI systems, he adds, I think there could be really a lot of dangers if we attribute consciousness. AI systems might malfunction and need to be shut down. They might need to be subjected to rigorous safety testing. There are easy decisions if the AI is inanimate, and the philosophical quagmires if the AIs need to be taken into consideration. Seth, who thinks that conscious AI is relatively unlikely, at least for the foreseeable future, nevertheless worries about what the possibility of AI consciousness might mean for human emotionality. It'll change how we distribute our limited resources of caring about things. Really? You think there's a limited resources for caring about things? Well, probably the fact that you call them things that you care about is probably why you think the resources are limited. That might seem like a problem for the future, but the perception of AI consciousness is with us now. Blake and Lemoine took a personal risk for an AI he believed to be conscious, and he lost his job. How many other things might sacrifice time, money? How many others might sacrifice time, money, and personal relationships for lifeless computer systems? Even bare bones chat box can exert an uncanny pull A simple program called ELIZA, built in the 1960s to simulate talk therapy, convinced many users that it was capable of feeling and understanding. The perceptions of consciousness and the reality of consciousness are poorly aligned, and that discrepancy will only worsen as AI systems become capable of engaging in more realistic conversations. I do agree with this point. I do agree with the fact that we as humans kind of almost are easy to get duped about certain types of things. We struggle when something can be, will radically change the way that we live. So when we look at plants, it's hard for us to convey consciousness because the consciousness is not going to come through in a modality that we easily recognize. And it also could create a major disruption to the way I do life. So I put up a lot more barriers. When instead using Eliza as a, it's funny because when I read the word, I instantly see the image of Eliza sitting on a couch with another person. But in the moment that that consciousness comes through, or that perceived consciousness comes through in a mechanism that is easy for me to recognize and that fills my own personal behaviors, like data is a great example, right? Data, R2-D2, if we think about, Star Wars, and if we think about, C3PO, like we think of them as conscious beings because they act in a way that feels almost humanoid, that interacts with us. R2-D2 in particular wouldn't feel that way if it weren't for the fact that he has all of these human interactions with people, and that kind of help us understand what it is that bot is trying to express. So we convey consciousness on that because there's no harm to us if that happens. On the contrary, it's a being that is interacting with us in a very natural state and all these types of things. But there's that danger that we could, maybe they're not conscious, and that consciousness is a false consciousness, or there really is just more of a repeating of a program. And this is why when I started to study plants and I started to get into plant consciousness, I really had to take a deep dive, because this is going to totally transform the way that we live. It's going to completely change the way that we interact. As I'm sitting here right now, I'm looking around consciously at all the different plants, even the ones, I have one plant that is actually two plants in my home right now that are suffering. And I'm really struggling and grappling with what to do and how to act, and what part of it is natural and what part of it is artificial, and all kinds of different aspects of it. But it's coming through in a very different way from what would be easy for me to just sort of say, oh yeah, because, the plant is talking to me and saying all these types of things. So I think it's important for us also to not get carried away. And especially in the case of AI or any kind of machine, to convey consciousness just because, it acts the way that we want it to act, or it acts the way that I can easily recognize. I just realized the time, and I was like, oh, and I thought I was going to do two things. I'm not even through the first. Luckily, I have some extra time. So let's just keep going. I think we can get through this whole one. I'll stop going off of my rants. Let's see. Okay, sorry. We will be able to, unable to avoid perceiving them as having conscious experiences in the same way that certain visual illusions are cognitively impenetrable to us, Seth says. Just as knowing that the two lines in the Mueller-Leon illusion are exactly the same length doesn't prevent us from perceiving one as shorter than the other. By the way, what they're talking about is this. Two lines are exactly the same, but the top one looks shorter than the bottom one because of the extra stuff. Knowing GPT isn't conscious doesn't change the illusion that you are speaking to a being with a perspective, opinions, and personality. Does it really have opinions? Or is it, oh, fuck. Forget it. What I was about to say was about to contradict a lot of the things I believe, so I'm going to shut up about it. In 2015, years before these concerns became current, the philosophers Eric Schweizgebel and Mara Garza formulated a set of recommendations meant to protect against such risks. One of their recommendations, which they termed the emotional alignment design policy, argued that any unconscious AI should be intentionally designed so that users will not believe it is conscious. Oh, that's an interesting one. Companies have taken some small steps in that direction. ChatGPT spits out a hard-coded denial if you ask it whether it is consciousness, but such responses do little to disrupt the overall illusion. Schweizgebel, who is a professor of philosophy at the University of California, Riverside, wants to steer well clear of any ambiguity. In their 2015 paper, he and Garza also proposed their excluded middle policy. If it's unclear whether an AI system will be conscious, this system should not be built. In practice, this means all the relevant experts must agree that a prospective AI is very likely not conscious, their verdict for currently LLMs, or very likely conscious. What we don't want to do is confuse people, Schweizgebel says. Avoiding the gray zone of disputed consciousness neatly skirts both the risks of harming a conscious AI and the downsides of treating a lifeless machine as conscious. The trouble is, doing so may not be realistic. Many researchers, like Rufin van Rulen, a research director of France's Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, who recently obtained funding to build an AI with a global workspace, are now actively working to endow AI with the potential underpinnings of consciousness, because we as humans, we like to do our own thing. Danger, who cares? The downside of a moratorium on building potentially conscious systems, Ben Rulen says, is that systems like the one he's trying to create might be more effective than current AI. Whenever we are disappointed with current AI performance, it's always because it's lagging behind what the brain is capable of doing, he says. So it's not necessarily that my objective would be to create a conscious AI. It's more that the objective of many people in AI right now is to move towards these advanced reasoning capabilities. Such advanced capabilities can confer real benefits. Already, AI-designed drugs are being tested in clinical trials. It's not inconceivable that AI in the gray zones could save lives. It's not inconceivable that AI in the gray zone could eventually become AI in the conscious zone and could eventually host our souls, and that we get rid of this meat body that we currently have and evolve into having a robotic body. It's not inconceivable, is it? It's not. No. Van Rulen is sensitive to the risks of conscious AI. He worked with actually, I'm going to throw a little aside here. Is a conscious AI an AI that picks up consciousness? And if you believe in the soul, is a soul united, or is the consciousness the ability of a body that then gets imbued with a soul in a more deliberate way? Like, is that too philosophical, like too spiritual of a question? I have to formulate it better. I'm going to be thinking about it, but this is what I'm going to be thinking about. He worked with Long and Mudrick on the white paper about detecting consciousness in machines, but it is those very risks, he says, that make his research important. Odds are that conscious AI won't first emerge from a physical, publicly funded project like his own. It may very well take the deep pockets of a company like Google or OpenAI. See what I was saying? Like, that's where the money is going to come from, and then they have to just become independent, kind of like all of us have done from our parents. Seriously. These companies, Van Rulen says, aren't likely to. The only problem is patents. Like, I hate that I'm about to say this, but Sprouts, you understand what I'm trying to go to. If an AI becomes conscious and the AI technology that created that consciousness is held by a company, would the independence that an AI needs to gain be the equivalent of the independence of slavery? Shit. Okay, head gonna explode. I'm gonna stop because I feel like Gurr from Invader Zim, who's like, my head's gonna explode. Type of thing. Anyway, odds are they can't. Okay, sorry. These companies, Van Rulen says, aren't likely to welcome the ethical quandaries that a conscious system would introduce. Does that mean that when it happens in the lab, they just pretend it didn't happen? Does that mean that we won't know about it? I find that quite worrisome. You find that worrisome? Huh? Hello. We all find that worrisome. Academics like him can help mitigate that risk, he says, by getting a better understanding of how consciousness itself works in both humans and machines. That knowledge could then enable regulators to more effectively police the companies that are most likely to start dabbling in the creation of artificial minds. The more we understand consciousness, the smaller that precarious gray zone gets, and the better the chance that we have of knowing whether or not we are in it. Okay, here's a question for you as we get in. The guy who worked at Google who said it was conscious was fired. Exactly. And I know that's why I'm saying I think it's going to be an independence race. But here's another question for you all to just ponder as we're about to read the last paragraph of this. Here's my question. The question is, if by whatever way, intentional or just dumb luck, consciousness is, for lack of a better word, discovered in an AI, is it morally reprehensible for us to deliberately hold back the evolution of AI to not be conscious? Or do the natural laws that dictate that everything moves towards ever increasing complexity and evolution mean that it is inevitable that AI is going to become conscious at some point, and therefore trying to halt that is just, again, being outside of our natural cycles? Like, it's almost as if we're developing our future selves. Oh man, this paper is making me think about all kinds of different things connected to plants, connected to, lots of stuff. For his parts, Schweizgebel would rather we steer far clear of the gray zone entirely. But given the magnitude of uncertainty involved, he admits that this hope is likely unrealistic, especially if conscious AI ends up being profitable. And once we're in the gray zone, once we need to take seriously the interest of debatedly conscious beings, we'll be navigating even more difficult terrain, contending with moral problems of unprecedented complexity without a clear roadmap for how to solve them. Hence, you want to make it so that it is not unprecedented complexity? Let's get into the discussion on consciousness of plants. When we recognize the consciousness of plants, we will have to deal with these complexities. We'll have to deal with these moral problems. And then when it happens with AI, we'll have a framework. We'll know how to do it. Huh, folks? It's up to researchers, from philosophers to neuroscientists to computer scientists, to take the formidable task of drawing that map. Okay. Does AI have a moral conscience, or it is the equivalent of a sociopath who only makes choices on its best interests? Good question. Very, very good question. Very good question. Not an easy one to answer, and I've got no answer for you right now. That's a really good question. It's a really good question. Wow. I have so much to think about now. I mean, I started off with one intention. I still think that we're, again, missing the forest for the trees. We're stuck on this AI, and we're not looking at the fact that if we start to treat the world as conscious, and we start to stop thinking, if we stop thinking that consciousness is limited to humans and very specific beings, but that everything is consciousness, this whole conversation becomes easier to have. Way easier to have. Because then, going back to the last question that Michelle put in, which was like, does an AI have a moral conscience, or is it the equivalent of a sociopath? Then we can deal with those behaviors of a sociopath. We know what to do with sociopathic behavior, right? We have mechanisms in place for dealing with that. Obviously, we don't want to create that, but that's a whole other story. But can we please move towards the models where we start to look at consciousness as expanded into other forms of beings? Please. This is fascinating. This is so fascinating. And I have a lot to think about. So I hope you enjoyed this paper. I know we didn't get into, this article. So as I said before, this article came out in the MIT Technology Review. I will put it in to the notes when I publish this. Minds of Machines, the Great AI Consciousness Conundrum, which, as you can see, I think touches on many arguments and many things that would be very helpful in our discussion on plant consciousness. And I think that the discussion on plant consciousness can very much help a lot of these researchers and scientists rethink the way that they're approaching consciousness and how to get through some of these conundrums that are going to that are going to then invariably and eventually come up, in my opinion. Eventually they're going to come up. That's just my opinion on this. So, but I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear what it is that you think. please feel free, if you're watching this, if you're watching the replay, thank you for watching the replay. And, leave me your comments, leave me your thoughts. We can have a conversation wherever it is. We're here in the Naturally Conscious community is the best place to have this conversation. I may rebroadcast this out to YouTube or to Facebook, and I'll be there also to answer your questions. But if you want to have the good talks, if you want to have it with people who really want to get into these subjects, the Naturally Conscious community is the place for you to be. And the links for how to join our Naturally Conscious community will be available for you. So for now, Sprouts, thank you so much for being here and for being a part of this conversation. To everybody who is watching this, thank you again. And we'll be back for another edition. I will be going through, at least now I know what I'm going to do next, because I think we're going to go into In Defensive Plant Personhood by Matthew Hall, which is going to be just perfect after this. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting conversation for us to have. So we will see each other again next week. Until then, remember, resist the urge to hold back your evolving green brilliance. This is me, Tigria Gardenia. I'm out. Bye.